What class in college did you work hardest on? And if you had to take the final today, what grade do you think you would get?
So for me, it's probably astronomy. Astronomy 101. That was my science
All
requirement.
right.
And I have to say, I've impressed many people with my ability to identify things in the sky over the years.
The sun, the moon.
Sounds like she'd get an A. Yeah, for me, what was hardest? Maybe con law, which I don't use at all today. Maybe literary theory. Also don't use it. Everybody go to college. I only get A's, so I'd definitely still get an A. I'm joking. I do terribly on all of these.
The class I worked hardest for was actually from when I was studying abroad. I took a medieval Spanish architecture course and worked so hard that I got an A, and the professor, who was definitely a Francoist, told me that I had brought honor upon my homeland. But if I were to take that exam today, I am sure I would get an F, and she would tell me that I had shamed the United States.
Oh, well, you wouldn't be the first one. This is Impromptu from Washington Post Opinions, a show that brings you conversations about the news we can't stop thinking about. I'm Molly Roberts, a columnist at The Post.
And I'm Drew Goins, author of the Today's Opinions newsletter. This week, we're talking about the value of higher education in America today.
College seems to be falling somewhat out of fashion. Attacks on universities are coming from left, right, and, well, maybe not so much center. Tuition costs have continued to rise, adding to the student debt crisis, and higher ed remains a culture war battleground, with some conservatives these days worrying that schools are turning our nation's best and brightest woke.
And with student debt collections set to resume next week, and Republicans rolling out an overhaul of the loan system, it feels like a good time to talk about the true costs and the true value of college education.
We're lucky to have our colleague and columnist Heather Long, an expert on cost and value, here to talk with us.
And on the stars.
Hey, Heather, thanks for joining us again.
Yes, well, I'll take a gold star for whatever. Cost-benefit analysis.
According to Pew Research polling, only 1 in 4 United States adults say that it's extremely or very important to have a 4-year college degree to get a well-paying job in today's economy. Are the other 3 of 4 right, Heather? How important is a college degree to earning potential?
If I answered that for today, based on all the historical data we have all the way up through April 2025, I would say yes, it still makes sense to get a college degree. It's still worth it. The lifetime earnings are just, we're talking about over $1 million, basically more that a college graduate would earn an average than a non-college graduate. All that data still says, yes, it's generally a good investment. But you can hear the but in my voice. Just like, honestly, if an 18-year-old called me up and said, should I go to college next year? I would struggle with my answer because of artificial intelligence. It's just totally changing the game right now of what is valued in the economy going forward, what the hot jobs are. And it's a really tricky decision now.
Yeah, I feel like through history, as I tried to get kind of a grasp on the return on investment, it does increase your earning potential, but that has fluctuated over the years. I was, reading that in 1971, a male college graduate earned 22% more than a high school graduate, but by 1979, it had dropped to 13%. Then in 1987, the earning gap was back up to 38%.
I will say it's interesting you point to the 70s and 80s because in some ways that was the last great heyday of factory work in the United States before all the technological change comes in and then we get all the trade, and whether it's trade with China or with Mexico or whatnot. And so you're right that it was a little bit closer of a call in that era about whether it made sense to go to college or not, particularly for young men who could still, get into a factory job and do pretty well for themselves. Most economists, and there's a great blog post from the New York Federal Reserve, and they would argue if they were on this podcast, they would say, Drew, from the 1990s to today, the college wage premium, the amount you're going to earn, has actually been...
CWP, right?
Yeah, we all look at that all the time, and just like my investment return. But it's actually been pretty stable. It's been pretty consistent and pretty stable. But the sad reason that's true, despite the rising cost of college, the student debt, all these other issues we're talking about, is because For those factory workers and the non-college educated, their wages have dropped a lot, and they just haven't rebounded. And that's the sad story of America in the last several decades. So it's not so much that college is so great. It's almost that your other choice has gotten, in some ways, even worse, even harder.
Yeah, my understanding was that college still pays off on average, but the problem is basically that the squeeze does not yield nearly so much or nearly so nutritious juice as it used to. And that's partly, laugh at me, sorry, I had an English degree. I'm just doing some turns of phrase. Otherwise, what was the point of paying all that money to go to school, man? This is partly because the labor market for college grads is getting weaker. And you mentioned the rise of AI and contributing to that when it comes to a lot of white-collar jobs. I imagine that being a paralegal, for instance, isn't as great a field to go into because these robots can perform the work of 1,000 paralegals, 100 paralegals. I don't really know the scale. But also because the cost is rising of going to college. So you were talking about the college wealth premium, the CWP, but when you think not just about wages, but about wealth, my understanding is that gap isn't quite as impressive because you have debts that you've taken on.
Yeah, I also read that New York Fed research data, Heather, and this feels like I'm playing an Uno reverse card. They also said that it doesn't pay off for about 25% of people who have gone to college in recent decades. And how, Heather, do those people identify beforehand that it's going to be a poor return on investment?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And it's particularly tough for me as someone who majored in both economics and English literature, because there's just been a huge drop off in people majoring in the humanities since the Great Recession of 0809. And certainly I feel like in the broader discussion, people joke about in the United States, like, you shouldn't go and major in literature like I did, or Latin, let's say, anymore.
I'll out myself as a Hispanic linguistics major.
Yeah. So we're not in vogue, Drew, you and I. But some of it is major. Is it career ready, let's say? Some of it is around the fact that if you go to a for-profit type institution, it tends not to pay off versus a more traditional university. And then it's people who don't complete or who take a long time to complete. That's where you really see a lot of tragic stories. And there's a number of reasons why people drop out and don't finish. But obviously that gives you the costs with no benefits.
I'm very interested in this didn't complete element. For the people who don't finish, if they do 3 years of college, should we not expect to see a 75% wage boost?
How foolish. College isn't about learning, Drew.
Right, exactly. And of course, you do get a small boost, but what are we really rewarding here? What is the market rewarding here, if not learning?
Well, the economics is that expensive piece of paper that you get, which sometimes has a lot of Latin on it still, is something that we call a market signal, right? It's simply telling that you had the tenacity to finish or the stupidity to finish, however you want to phrase that. And in many cases, I think, it's a marker of social status. A, you finished, and B, you spent all that time, not just with professors, but with other high-achieving, driven students. And often over the years, that's the other big benefit of going to college, is you're surrounded by people who tend to be coming from higher income backgrounds and who tend to be coming from more successful families in a financial sense, and that often gives you a boost and a leg up in the job application process and just the hierarchy of the United States and of many other countries.
A lot of people in recent years are opting to go to trade schools or get 2-year associate degrees instead of enrolling in 4-year programs. Do you all think that's a good option in today's economic and also political environment?
I am a huge proponent of trade school or apprenticeships. So the good news for America is we have doubled the number of apprenticeships that we have in this country in the last 10 years. The bad news is we're still only have about 600,000 people a year doing apprenticeships. And those are paid, on the job learning, paid. It's very clear, what your career path is. Everyone I've interviewed who's in one of apprenticeship program is happy because they feel stable and they don't have any debt. And, we should be doing millions of these a year. And I will say President Trump signed an executive order saying his goal is to get to 1 million. To me, that seems not ambitious enough. For a nation of our size, we should have 3 to 5 million people a year doing this. So we're going in the right direction, but gee, it's slow.
Yeah, and that seems right to me. You were talking about people who don't finish, Heather. I think it's around 40% of students who start and never finish. So if those people go to vocational school instead, do apprenticeships, get those 2-year degrees, it seems like that would be a great thing for the economy. And more skilled labor certainly would be good for the economy.
Yeah, I think it's terrific. I mean, I think back to college, and the most useful experience that I had was working for the college newspaper, which was not a course, but that was, the closest I came to something akin to an apprenticeship. I got, I think, like $50 a week. Yeah, so technically it was paid. But I mean, I love journalism. I love being in the podcast studio, which nevertheless sometimes feels like a place of real existential dread. And I think to myself, would I be happier had I been a welder? And there's just like so much pressure to go do the college thing, right? It's just so baked in to society that if you do something different than that, you are kind of not taking the most ambitious path.
I gotta jump in. I think what you have just described, Drew, is true for our generation, but it's changing. It's really changing the discussion in America. For Gen Z and the teenagers of today, I was just at an event with one of the Anthropic AI co-founders, Jack Evans, and he was talking about the types of jobs that are not going to be automated away. And he kept mentioning nursing, for example, some healthcare roles, not to mention things like maintenance technician at a semiconductor plant or at a data center. And so there could be a huge, huge sea change very soon. And I think it's already starting to happen where the roles that are valued and that can't be done by a robot suddenly are these roles that people were so-called looking down on in the 90s and early 2000s and 2010s.
Yeah, it's a great point. I'm thinking about this thread that I saw on Twitter recently from a guy. He had done a bunch of entrepreneurship stuff without a degree or anything. And he, launched this very successful app. He was very much in the tech space. And he was saying, I don't think I really need college. I think so many people in our generation don't need college. But college looks like a lot of fun. The point that he makes about college being fun and having all sorts of social benefits is a very realistic one. We're going to talk about that after the break.
Welcome back. I'm Molly Roberts, and I'm here with Drew Goins and Heather Long talking about whether higher education is worth it. So I'm curious, what are the benefits of going to college? What did you guys both get out of it?
I mean, it's fun. College was a ton of fun.
Okay, Asher Roth.
I'm here in the studio wearing my University of North Carolina sweatshirt, and I still have very warm feelings for my university. I enjoyed learning, right? But I also loved just, being with friends and doing musicals and feeling like I was largely at summer camp for 4 years. And I recognize that that's like a huge luxury. It is inaccessible to a large part of the population. And I want to be clear, like I was an in-state student paying in-state tuition, and I personally am still paying down those loans that I took out. But to me, it was very worth it because, it gave me that credentialing. I'm able to signal that I'm a critical thinker and I'm here working at the Washington Post, but also because I was in like 15 student-directed musicals and would go to the dining hall at 11:30 p.m. and eat biscuits and gravy and got to see front row Carolina Duke basketball for $0. For me, it's just like, it feels like part of the like social bedrock of a certain set of America.
Yeah, what about you, Heather?
So I'm a project graduate of Wellesley College, and I would say it was the best decision of my life. And for me, it gave me a huge amount of confidence, and it's an all-women school, so it really taught me leadership. Every organization on campus was led by a woman, and it's widely known that in fields that are technical, economics, and sciences especially, women's colleges have produced a large number of the PhDs in this country and master's degree holders. There's just something about these environments that really are conducive to encouraging women in more technical STEM fields. And I have to say, on both a personal and professional level, it's been hugely helpful. My first job was through a Wellesley connection. And I can tell you that as a working mom, to have other women who I can bare my soul to on rough days and who can give me great advice has been the reason I'm still in the workforce, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I definitely both met people and learned things that helped me succeed professionally at college. Those things weren't really in the classroom so much. I mean, like, nobody here wants to hear me recite the general prologue of the Canterbury Tales, but...
Not nobody.
I'll just do the whole post-credits in Middle English, I think. But I think that at college, you get to become a quote-unquote real person with training wheels on. You learn what you like.
Nice.
You learn whom you like, with way more people and types of people around than probably those where you grew up. You do hard things both academically and personally. You get points for sitting in a room disagreeing with people and taking in that disagreement and putting something better back out, which is just a terrific life skill. You get points for asking questions. You get points for trying to answer impossible questions about things like morality and meaning. I mean, that makes you a better and bigger person. And I think also you kind of learn maybe what's wrong with this institution that you're learning in. And then you start thinking about how we might fix it. And that applies also to institutions that you may be in later in life. And I just think that that's all valuable from a civic perspective.
Civil debate, though, questioning authority, those sound awfully liberal to me, which leads me to, my next question about the reputation, or we'll say stereotype, that so many college campuses have developed, that they're these like hotbeds of ideological groupthink, right? Do you guys think that the modern university education is still creating well-rounded independent thinkers who can understand different perspectives? Or is there any truth to the claim that I'll use the I word, indoctrination, is happening?
Well, I was indoctrinated in high school, buddy.
Me too, but possibly in the other direction.
Maybe it starts with Sesame Street. But anyway, yeah, it's interesting. So I graduated in 2004. I think I'm the grandma on this podcast today. But I actually wrote, right before I left, an article for our student magazine newspaper that was called 10 Things I Hate About You, about my alma mater. And one of them was not being exposed to enough Republicans at the time, that some let's say non-liberal ideologies. And I remember when I showed up on campus in the fall of 2000 in my very first class, somebody turned to me and said, "So who are you voting for, Gore or Nader?" And there was no option for George W. Bush. And, I do think it's been a huge mistake for universities not to grapple and to have more diverse political and otherwise faculties, and to not try harder to have a more diverse political student bodies.
Yeah, obviously the most important thing at a university, at a liberal arts university where liberal is not supposed to mean progressive, is that you are open to inquiry, you're open to challenging all sorts of dogmas, including the ones you grew up with, including the ones you're predisposed to agree with. And I do think it's a shame that more and more people have felt, and the atmosphere has been at these schools, that there are a set of beliefs you need to agree with, and they're not liberal beliefs, but progressive beliefs. Of course, I think the impulse from conservatives, and certainly from the Trump administration today, to shut all that down and to make it so diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives are not allowed to exist, otherwise we're going to take your money away, is also completely contrary to the spirit of free inquiry. And of course, using the arm of the state to do that is much more dangerous than having a bunch of student activists exert social pressure to fall into line with progressive dogmas.
The one question that I have as we talk about these ideals of inquiry and stuff, is either side really committed to that sort of questioning of dogma anymore, right? Which feels like at the heart of the university. I think it is rare to have a university that is like really, truly encouraging of heterodox or even iconoclastic thinking anymore, which is a shame.
Well, I think that's sadly true across society. I mean, you can see neighborhoods are becoming more blue or red. You know, people are literally self-selecting where they live, even outside of areas that used to be that, you know, when you zoom out, they look kind of purple. But when you zoom in to like block by block, people are choosing to affiliate and literally live next to, let alone study in college or high school with people who share their views. And so you're right. It's just harder and harder to find a way to have those dialogues.
So if more people do opt out of college due to politics or price or anything else, what will that mean for the country? What, if anything, is lost, do you think, with fewer grads in the workforce?
I'll start optimistically and say that I think it breaks the kind of vice-like grip of the expectation of college, which I think is a great thing. If fewer and fewer people are graduating, if it's seen more as a choice than a default, I think that one enriches college for people who like actively make it happen. And it also enriches and destigmatizes non-college options for the people who don't go to university.
And Heather?
Yeah, I'd agree. I see only upsides. And especially, I really hope care work becomes a greater value in this nation. And I think a lot about things like childcare and elder care workers who have been severely underpaid for a long time. But those are the kind of jobs that are very hard for a robot or an AI to do. Do you really want to leave your toddler with a robot? And so I think that could be a really interesting world going forward, where we truly learn to revalue work and different types of work in America. And for too long, it's just been, oh, the white-collar, college-educated work, that's the stuff that really matters and deserves to be highly paid.
I will be pessimistic because my liberal arts education taught me how to be devil's advocate. What I am worried about is colleges as they exist today disappearing, or not totally disappearing, but becoming less accessible to those who do want that and who would benefit from that. And I think that that is certainly a real threat of dismantling the education department, making it harder to get federal funding for people who can't afford college, or making it harder for colleges to be need blind. There are a lot of people out there, and I agree it's not everyone, but there are a lot of people out there who would like to spend the morning reading Madame Bovary and then go back to their dorm and talk about anything from Israel, Gaza to, who knows, the White Lotus with their roommate who herself just finished an organic chemistry midterm. I mean, I think that that's a great and amazing thing, and it's a uniquely American thing, the role that college plays as an experience that occupies such a big place in the cultural realm itself, and that is very far from just a means to a professional end.
Well, thank you both very much for the instructive conversation. I think I can confidently say that we have brought honor to each of our alma maters, and perhaps even to our country. Thank you both.
Thank you. I have something I need welded if you want to help me out with that after we sign off.
Before we go, Molly, can you give us the general prologue?
One that April with the shore of Sutta, the drought of March hath pierced to the ruta, and bowed every vein in switch the gore, of which virtue engendered is the floor. When Zephyr sake with his sweet breath, I'll fade myself
Well, Molly,
out.
I'm not sure AI could do that better.
Thanks, Heather.
Thank you.
This episode was produced by Hadley Robinson and Regina DeHeer, edited by Jasmine Green, and mixed by Emma Munger. Special thanks to Millie Mitra and Deirdre Byrne. Thanks for listening to Impromptu. Please send us your thoughts about the value of higher education. Email impromptu@washpost.com. And be sure to tune in on Tuesday to hear our colleague Dana Milbank tackle the biggest political news of the moment.